I think it's probably, I'm probably suffering from imposter syndrome, I realised. I never suffer from it, but I mean, I don't think anyone shapes cybersecurity, do they? It's, lots of people try, and lots of people fail. So I can.
Can I have a important? Right now, you're sharing.
Yeah, that's fine.
You're sharing the notes with. Is that okay? On the in the Teams.
That's just the next slide.
Okay.
Not the next.
So are you okay if
I'm
we
okay.
record the?
Yeah, that's
this
fine.
stuff?
Yeah. Oh,
So
I'm good.
really on the stroke of full now, so
I realise university time is not the same as other forms of time.
yeah, it'd be like people used to ask how long does it take to get from Bath to London? Well, it's about 300 years. Yeah. I wonder how, does anybody have a feel for how many people are going to show up?
Small's good. Small is good.
Sure, it's fine, yeah. That's 25. 25 signed up, yeah.
If I guess.
Right.
Into this.
25 seconds, it's like.
I mean, it's not becomes after the executive council, so it's not sure what's making them.
Yeah.
I'll send this.
Strategic Defence Review, David, is out on Monday.
Yeah,
Strategic Defence Review.
yes.
Huge chunk on offensive cyber.
That means, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, 2016 already sent you. Oh, okay.
Again, there's no corrective.
Yeah.
These things. Just like things that we. So
Normally expect to make this turn up the issues up 50%, but yeah. But I think we're going to start with them for children.
yeah, it's essential.
Thank you.
Now, I've been. About 6 weeks. Wow. Maybe if I'm not.
Closing the door always be right skip.
Yeah.
Can you look across the neutral?
No, I'm good.
Sure.
What is the crash? Fantastic. I honestly thought you would have been in Estonia this week. Yeah.
Oh,
I can do, but that's my problem. I think I'm really quick.
I'm very good.
So I think I was like,
I'm guessing about
secretary board from the previous.
what is that situation question?
That's also good.
Yeah. She decided. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Great. So lovely to have Martin Sadler with us. Martin is now a special advisor to the Bristol VC, Vice Chancellor, I think. To
Yeah, whatever that means, but yes. Yes.
So you're a SPAD. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes. Former Vice Principal and Director of Hewlett Packard Labs now, and also of HP Labs before that. Martin has an honorary DSc from the University of Bath. Great thing to have. And a lot of experience in advising the government in all sorts of ways around security. So it's really lovely to have him come talk to us about shaping security. That's he's really someone to listen to on this topic. But he used to be my boss as well.
We've all done bad things in previous lives, David, that we have to atone for.
So Martin, very welcome.
Thank you, David. Yeah, but I'll give you a little bit of background here because well, my original background was mathematics. I ended up doing a PhD, or starting one anyway, in the philosophy of mathematics, much to the objections of my former head of school in mathematics, who thought I was completely wasting my life at that point. I then abandoned philosophy to join computer science department at Imperial College as a postdoc without a PhD. I never finished my PhD. Do not do what I did. So probably ignore everything I'm going to say. And ended up a lecturer there. Got headhunted to HP. Started, like many of you will, in a kind of a research career for quite a while. Ran some teams. Became a project manager, ran bigger teams, ran teams of teams as a department manager, ended up a lab director, and finally ended up as vice president for Europe for HP for research, where I was signing off all of the framework and Horizon, all these big scale projects for the company. But I started cyber in '96 when you could almost count the number of people working in what was called information security for the most part back then. Almost count them. I mean, it was a pretty small group and everyone kind of knew everyone. And really the only university that was doing cyber at the time was Royal Holloway. And then, of course, the rest is history. We've gone this exponential growth curve that you are all currently part of. So, yeah, I mean, I still do what I'd still do in cyber as opposed to talk generically about technology and stuff. I chair the NCSC's National Cybersecurity Centre's Research Advisory Panel. So that's the group of people that actually looks at the internal research that they do for protecting the country. So that's my claim to actually still being on the coalface. We are currently between Imperial and Bristol writing a report on cyber growth for the country. So if you have any cool ideas about how to really shape cybersecurity, you need to email me afterwards and get you mentioned in a report that DCIT is very excited by, because obviously they don't have enough ideas on the shelf that weren't Tory ideas. Well, that's the way it works. That's the most important thing to understand for policy. If it's a previous government's really stonkingly great idea, the next government probably won't use it, unfortunately. So yes, so if you've got ideas, do mail me on things that you think are important for growth around jobs in cybersecurity. There's a lot of, I'm not going to talk that much about that, but I mean there's a lot on the fact that the number of jobs is going to continue to grow, possibly by another 100,000 people in cyber in the UK by 2030. That seems certain if you look at the supply side, less certain where those jobs actually will be if you look at the demand side. So from an economics point of view, it's slightly ropey in terms of the data. And everyone is caught up in the here now of dealing with very reactive short-term problems. So there's not a lot of attention paid to the things that you hopefully are spending your time on as PhD students on the future. So, and I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try and put enough cyber examples in, so this is about cybersecurity, but I'm going to talk about the techniques, the tools, the ways of thinking that have actually stood me well, that helped me go on my journey from where you are, basically, to actually quite a senior position, and doing very well out of it in the process. are now, reasonably influential position in influencing government in what the country decides to do, which is where some of you ought to end up down the road. So there are plenty of tensions in cybersecurity, and I'm sure, we could spend an hour just going through different tensions in the space. So Richard Horn, the new CEO of NCSC, has taken the story, the underlying narrative, back to adversaries and defenders, and it's all about the conflict, and we build our castle walls high and put moats around it. And it's a very 1990s story about cybersecurity. So we could debate whether or not that is the right way to think of cyber looking at the future. Not everyone thinks that way. So there's plenty of tensions in how we think about it. There's tensions between looking at it from an adversary or a defender's point of view. So just mentions, David, the Strategic Defence Review will be out on Monday. A lot of attention in that on offensive cyber and how the country is going to organise to do more of that and employ a lot more people doing that. And lots of people don't want the country focused on offensive cyber. They would rather we actually did a much better job at defending against others. Inside companies, people still think cyber gets in the way. And I'm sure some of you have seen that. It's like, oh, for goodness sake, cyber just slows us down. Why on earth do we have to do that? And the last thing we're going to do is build it in. The Computer Misuse Act, I remember when that actually started way back, that basically says some of you could go to jail for what it is that you do in terms of your research if you push too hard in looking at vulnerabilities. And the sad thing is we still have plenty of companies who will prosecute researchers for pointing out why there was a flaw in their product or service, even though it ought to have helped the company from losing a lot of money. But they just don't like the idea, and they will prosecute people. And the government really doesn't know what to do with that, because on the one hand, the last thing you want to do is shut down research and stop. But on the other, on the other side, you don't want to be encouraging, hacking gangs to be improving their techniques. So the country doesn't really know what to do about that as a tension, any more than Europe does or US does. In terms of companies, you have this really crazy situation where Microsoft built in quite a bit around security and then had to dismantle it because they were told by the EU that they got to open up a lot of their interfaces to third-party products. And Apple is going through similar things right now. So there's a tension between allowing a company to actually do security by design and build it in. But by doing that, it tends to lock its product together and make it very hard for third parties to have interfaces at the levels they would like. So then they come under pressure to open up those interfaces, and that's where a lot of vulnerabilities end up in the ecosystem. And as you all know, attack surface is growing faster than our ability to prevent. So the point of this is there are just going to be tons and tons of opportunities for you to shape things. Whether you stay in academia, whether you go to industry, whether you create a startup, whatever you do, there's just going to be a lot of opportunity to shape. And because most of these things have been around for a while and people really don't know how to cope with them. So whatever you do, you've got that space that, if you come up with bright ideas, people will listen to you in terms of what next. So what I'm going to talk about is really four quite simple, they're kind of the stuff that gets covered in Harvard Business Review kind of models around how to think about, if you like, what it is that you do and to get it to work. So the first one I'm going to talk about is this tension between excellence and impact. And we will get onto cyber. So excellence here is, so this is what you do. This is what you've been spending your last 3 years, 2 years, 1 year maybe, whatever, doing is focusing on being great at what you do. It's what universities are about. It's about focusing on that, often basic, but not necessarily basic research. It's not the same discipline by discipline, but each discipline sort of has its own internal logic, for want of a better word, in the way it operates. And it's all about technology push. It's all about, we'll do some clever stuff and then we'll worry about how to translate it down the road for the most part. So if you're on the other side of the fence, worrying about impact, you tend to view the people focused on excellence as the geeks or the nerds or the whatever derogatory label you choose to use. Impact is about, if you like, being effective. It's in the industry world, it's about the market pull. And of course, if you're on the excellence side, you tend to regard everything to do with impact as marketing hype and the bullshit and the like. And people take different developmental journeys between these two. So if you stay in universities, for the most part, if you stay as a researcher, you end up a really big professor. You could stay almost entirely focused on excellence and where your attention goes and not really worry too much about impact. If you worry about impact, it's probably, you know, what will happen if you move into a more commercial kind of job from where you go. And the graph there is a sort of, I think it's a pretty typical journey that people take over time in terms of where their attention is spent between the two. So you could stay forever focused on excellence. A large chunk of you, when you leave and finish your PhDs and go out, if you don't stay in universities, will very rapidly have to come to terms with how you're being effective and making things happen. And you'll lose tons of attention on the research side. And you'll be quite, some of you will be sorrowful about that. Others might be quite pleased, depending on how your PhDs went. Do you get this? You kind of move from excellence to impact. And some people just stay there in the business world, focused on making things happen and kind of forget about the fact that they were actually clever ones in terms of what they worked on. A lot of people, though, kind of swing back to their attention sort of being somewhere between the two. And that's kind of like a mid-career level for individuals. They find the happy medium where they do enough technical work or stay involved with technical work, and that they have enough influence or enough impact based on that. And then a very few, less than 10% of people, and maybe less than 5% actually, enter this state where they can move incredibly rapidly between paying very deep attention on technical stuff and then back to worrying about the impact on the coalface. And they can just switch their language between talking to business leaders, you know, and the market and politicians and the public and other researchers almost instantaneously. That's not many people. So to put it slightly differently, I'm getting on to cyber. If you see it as this sort of it's just a sort of typical business school 2x2 kind of matrix, but if you see impact against excellence, the sort of the professor career route is to increase their excellence. You know, you're all somewhere on this, or somewhere up back here at the moment. You've all kind of done much the same. You haven't focused too much on how any of it matters. You do that, but if you carry on up, that is a kind of a very academic career trajectory between the two. If you move now into business, you tend to, as I said, redirect your attention away from excellence down into impact, or the horizontal axis, I should say, rather than down. And then if you sit somewhere in between, plenty of people in an area like cyber match this called a middle CTO curve of people who've managed to get enough of an understanding of the business world and how to make stuff happen, but then come back to staying quite in touch with the technical work. And those are actually quite different career trajectories. And it is worth you thinking about which one you want to take, because it's actually quite hard to move between those trajectories. We talk about people having careers where they can move seamlessly between academia and industry and, you know, government. In practice, as I'm sure David will agree, it's actually quite challenging for most people to do that. It's not a straightforward route, is it, in doing that? And this is where people are on this curve, is that for your next career step is probably the most important thing to think about in terms of decisions that you will need to make and situations you will need to navigate. So typically in an organization, you will have, it could be some form of cyber team. It could be big company, small company, doesn't really matter whether there's 1,000 people and it's a tech giant doing this, or whether there's 3 people and it's inside a smaller company. And you have senior execs and you have the board. And this could be, so This could be you in your next job and your boss is down here somewhere. This could be the whole cyber team trying to talk to the board in terms of company. This could be the professors in the university trying to talk to senior administrators who are down here somewhere. That's your students, senior administrators, isn't it? Some, in fact, you probably think they're down here, because you probably think they don't have an effect either. But that's kind of like, it's a very common situation to see that tension. And so what happens is, well, this is what happens in cyber. It doesn't happen necessarily with we can't see the colours that well. So that's reality. That's kind of where the cyber team are. That's where the company board is. The company isn't doing what it has to do on cyber, so the cyber team feels like they're going to persuade them to do something. Right. But actually, people's perceptions are different. The board tends to think that this cyber team is overly geeky over this thing. You know, it doesn't have any sense of what it is the company's trying to do. And the cyber team thinks that the board is real flat and down here, that they have no understanding of technology at all, let alone cyber. You know, we don't understand anything about what's going on in the outside world. We don't understand cloud, they don't understand AI, they don't understand anything about IT whatsoever, or computer science whatsoever. And neither are completely true. But then what do these two groups do to react? So the cyber team thinks its mission in life is to educate the board to be much better technically, so they understand the risks involved. Whereas the board thinks they really wish this cyber team would get real about the business. And you end up with a bit of a gap. And if you actually look at a lot of the advice that is given, even now, around how to talk to the board and things, it fails to get to grips with this gap. Because, you know, people are in different spaces and they're not sure what to do about it. So, what would you do? You just failed your interviews. So
Everybody's sort of talking to the wrong colleagues who actually does this.
well, Robert is one of the better people at doing this out there. But I can assure you, there's an awful lot of people who are far worse. They're just a lot worse than people like Robert. What would you do? How do you solve this challenge? You've just been hired into the cyber team. What is your advice, knowing that trying to educate the board probably isn't going to work?
If your aim is to, try to get the board up to scratch, and with anybody, you're able to create the boards sometime in technical.
That hasn't been successful in practice for most companies. Historic, I'm just going on the data that's out there. Most cyber teams have not managed to successfully educate their boards on risk in general, let alone cyber.
I would say that you need to translate it, right? Like this is the role that when you think of people that work in cybersecurity, really at all, there's so much of that literature revolves around bridging the gap between the two. I think Oxford has that whole series called Bridging the Gap. So I think it's the role of these translators that have to convey maybe to both parties about what is required or what is needed in order to come together or to shrink that divide, right?
Yeah. So what I want to try and persuade you is that if you have a simple model and you map it to your problem, like this one, it actually suggests ways of solving the problem. And here's another way of solving the problem is you find someone on the cyber team that speaks a common language with the board. That's not necessarily straightforward. Has some shared disciplinary background or something. You're trying to connect these two blobs. You find the shortest distance, but putting a translator, someone in the middle who could do that role is another good solution. The value of models in how you look at, sorry, go on. I think the CISOs see it as their responsibility to talk to the board. That is definitely true. They're not necessarily the best person, the best equipped person to do that. And because of the power dynamics, they're less likely to trust you as a new member of staff to go talk to the board, because they're still on the firing line if you get it wrong, even if though you might be better at it. But actually, if you look at the best strategies out there, they are things for finding people who can translate. They are about finding members of the team who could gel, resonate, connect with some member, some senior exec or board member, and build more of a relationship in which to actually have the dialogue. So in fact, what happens is you're bringing the two sides closer together in terms, and those individuals, those mediators, get the cyber team to move further to the right. They also help the board to become more clued up in practice around areas like cyber. But you'll meet exactly that same situation in a number of you will anyway, in terms of first real jobs out there, where your boss is someone who is not a technologist, or their boss isn't, and so they don't, they're struggling with, explaining to their boss what it is the team is actually working on. And you'll suffer if the entire management chain doesn't really understand what you do. People who thrive are ones who do good stuff, but everyone else is paying attention up the management chain. So it is a situation that occurs a lot, I will argue. And I think the easiest way of thinking about it is just in your mind to position people around you in your world on these two axes. You can throw it away after, you don't have to, it's a tool. It's not necessarily the complete truth. There are other factors that matter too. But I think just this simple mapping in my career has probably got me into working out what the answer is for a good over 50% of the challenges that I've ever met, particularly team dynamic challenges where different people are looking at the world differently. Just understanding that people do look at it differently between these two axes, and that's not to say either is right or wrong, but it does help you work out what your next best step is going to be and who you're going to talk to and what suggestions you're going to make about what to do next. So I haven't lost you completely. Let's talk about the future. So there are tons and tons of different models out there. So why the future? Because cyber is going to be in the thick of everything that is happening with emerging technologies, whether it's AI or quantum or anything else. Cyber is written through it, like a stick of rock. It's written right the way through. And you're going to get caught up in lots of conversations about the future. So understanding how to think about it is important. Now, there are lots of different ways people talk about it. You're going to have to live with whatever the organization you're in does. Universities don't talk about it anything like enough. But, the tech industry often talks about technology readiness levels, TRLs. So if you're caught up in defense related stuff, that's their common language. It's a NASA thing. It's what NASA did in the 60s for, how ready is all this stuff for doing the moon mission, essentially, is kind of where it started. And, lots of people do horizon scanning. Universities sometimes have this like, well, we do basic research, which gets translated, and then we don't really care what happens further down the line. There's a URL there if you want to go see stuff on futures. There's a lot of different models. SOIF is a UK-based thing that does a lot of laying out of different models. The one I want to actually talk about is Horizons, which is a business model that has waxed and waned in terms of enthusiasms, but I actually think it's the simplest model to explain why people think differently as well about what's going on. So Horizon 1 is existing lines of business. It's what 80% plus of companies do. It's it's what they're currently involved with. So in HP, inkjet printing, they produced inkjet printers forever. They're continuing to produce inkjet printers. It's an established business. They make money out of it still. That's all Horizon 1. The opportunities to look sideways, to develop adjacent markets, or to re-platform, if you like, your existing businesses to take advantage of some new technology out there for businesses is Horizon 2. And then the really transformational large stuff, which might disrupt the world, is Horizon 3. So the majority of companies put almost all their investment, as I said, in Horizon 1. They do some Horizon 2 and almost nothing Horizon 3. So Horizon 3 is the kind of skunk works corporate research. It's less than 5% of R&D budgets in almost everywhere apart from the current big tech companies. Whoever's the top of the current big tech league, they're the only ones that will invest in significantly in Horizon 3, taking the gamble. And even they are putting less and less effort into that. So again, if you look at everything around OpenAI and Google and Microsoft around AI, most of that for them is switched back to Horizon 1. They know what they're doing, they know where they're going, they're just incrementally turning the handle on it. They are not actually thinking that much about how AI itself might be disrupted in its next wave. And this is a bit of a challenge for cyber. So if you're a small business, you could play into any of those horizons. It's usually harder to get investment if you're not in Horizon 1. What we've seen with startups in cyber is a huge number of Me Too lookalike companies all doing the same thing or very similar in a way that you cannot really distinguish them in terms of their pitches. And they are pretty much all Horizon 1. They are current businesses. They're looking to do it a bit differently from the way the incumbents are already doing it. Yet another crypto algorithm to do something that is pretty similar to what we've currently got. Yet another consultancy practice for how to build, you know, do cyber essentials or related pieces. In big companies, these things are actually managed and organized differently. And that's an important difference. And in fact, I think I would argue that people who are really good at Horizon 1 research are not the same people who are good at Horizon 3 research at all. And in fact, you see that in corporate research labs organizations, that the people there don't really want to go and work in businesses, because the nature of R&D and innovation in those organizations is actually quite different from being on that kind of, we're going to go to Mars, how are we going to make it happen kind of mission. So the important thing with this model is it doesn't equate those horizons with timelines. Typically, Horizon 2 takes longer to make happen than Horizon 1. Horizon 3 takes longer than Horizon 2. But if you can, again, you're doing inkjet printers, your Horizon 1 R&D might be a new ink. It doesn't change your business fundamentally, but it could be 10 years in the producing of that new ink so that, you know, photons will last longer without fading, for example. And you can have Horizon 3 ideas that happen incredibly fast. And that's why I think it's important not to just, you know, confuse this with timelines. So the bottom line here is understand which horizon you're working in and those that you're interacting with are looking for. A lot of things not happening out there between different companies, between research teams at universities, between government and each other, is because there's this mismatch in the horizon that they think they're trying to make things happen. So I've got tons of examples. What would you put? What wouldn't you put in Horizon 1 for that is happening in cyber? So if you think Horizon 1 is all the pen testers and the, you know, the cyber businesses that many of you will have interacted with, they're kind of existing businesses. They've been around a while. It doesn't look like they want to change terribly much. What would you put into Horizon 2 or 3?
Safe.
Sorry?
Quantum safe in Horizon 2.
Quantum safe, yes. I mean, it's a different. I mean, for most companies, the shift to PQC kind of technologies will be Horizon 2. It will require them to re-engineer some of the way they do public key or whatever they're going to do. I mean, so yes, that would be an example. I mean, it's a pretty small Horizon 2 thing in reality, but it is one, and that's why NCSC have told people to get on with it, because they need to be thinking about paying attention to it. I mean, what I mean by small is there are algorithms out there. People know how to do it. So it's not like that you're going to have to do some exploratory work to work out how. What else?
Deepfakes.
Deepfakes is a good example of probably Horizon 3 in the sense that nobody's got a clue what to do. You know, it's like a lot of scams. It's like we can tell people they shouldn't do it, but we know all the psychology tells us they're still going to click on the link. They're still going to be conned. I mean, con men have been working this for hundreds of years very successfully. It's no different online. I mean, those are probably big challenges. I mean, they're not really Horizon 3 opportunities yet. They're kind of possibly beyond Horizon 3, and because nobody knows really what to do about them. You don't see many significant ideas out there
No.
for dealing with them. I think what I would suggest is that actually, so different industries are split differently. Cyber is inherently all Horizon 1. And the reason for that is because you've had this growth from next to no people. There's been so many jobs, so much opportunity around just doing the basics. That has kept most companies focused on the here and now. There's no need to focus on the future when growing your existing business is perfectly good. So if you've got a business and you can grow it, you can keep adding, you don't need to worry about Horizons 2 and 3. The problem with that for the country is that we have these new challenges like deep fakes or even not so deep fakes, and that we're not actually working on enough. So you might have a few PhD students doing something interesting there. None of that is translating or turning into real opportunities in the business world. So if you have ideas on what to do about things that are Horizon 2 or 3, those are the ones that you really have to get in front of organizations like DSIT, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, because those are the areas that will get investment. Do you want to shape, cybersecurity? Those ideas stand the best chance of getting research funding from research councils. The desire to spot, deal with big problems, if you've got any ideas, is huge. You will get support from research councils in those spaces. You will get support from central government if you want to create a business and get going in those areas. So your best route to shaping the future is, one, you have to blend this excellence with impact thing. You have to have both, because you have to have good ideas and you have to have an understanding how to make it happen. And you need to play in Horizon 2 or 3 and be clear about which of those you're doing and have a really good idea to do it. So if it is you've got a really good angle on PQC, then by all means do that Horizon 2 thing, go create a business. You'll probably do just fine. If you really want to shape things, move into Horizon 3 for something that's bigger. Fake news, deep fakes. And there are plenty of other ideas that probably don't have, that impossibility about them that probably dealing with fakes does
Where does
today.
BRICS sit?
Sorry?
Where does the BRICS system of the digital currency sit?
Where would you put it?
Because it's not defined yet, maybe 3.
I mean, I think something like blockchain, for example, could start it. If you think when it, Bitcoin originally, those original ideas, the idea of chaining hashes probably was chaining hashes went nowhere for what, 10 years maybe? I mean, before it was picked up by Bitcoin, turned into blockchains. Blockchains hasn't really survived as an idea that's built. It hasn't transformed the world. It's a cute idea, but it hasn't quite perhaps had the delivery from it that you might have expected. But those are the kind of things to look for. Those are the kind of things to go try. So you want to change the world, you pick one, you get behind it, and that's what you work on. So am I derailing all your PhD students in terms of what they're supposed to work on? Doing some of this stuff inside a PhD can be quite hard. I mean, you can do preparatory work for some of those ideas. Actually working on them can be quite hard because you've got to, you're kind of going into an unknown. You may end up with nothing. And because if you can't find a way to have a deep any kind of insight in the space, you could be left with, well, I worked on an interesting topic for 3 years, but I didn't actually have anything at the end of it. So it's a bit of a risk for a PhD, but you can kind of do stuff at the meta level around a problem as a PhD and use that as the training background in which to jump off and do something else. If you can persuade whoever you're going to persuade to do the next step. So cyber, the way we talk about cyber hasn't actually, you're all too young, aren't you, for the 80s? I mean, I mean, most of you weren't born in the 80s, were you? Obviously, you were born in the 80s. I mean, it's like, but you can remember War Games when it came out, can't you? As a movie, maybe. Yeah. I mean, so War Games, 1983 movie, Neuromancer, William Gibson, the book, 1984. It's kind of where cyber was shaped. I mean, those are probably two of the biggest. I mean, there's the whole stack load of science fiction writers in the 80s that were writing around the future, you know, well before we get to Black Mirror kind of stuff today. But it hasn't fundamentally changed. If you go back and you look at those really early movies and those early books, and you look at the way they talk about cyber, and then you look at the way it does show up around, you know, deep fakes in Black Mirror today, or, you know, other related TV, film, drama stuff, it is all pretty much the same. And that's a problem, because the story is, in terms of its excellence impact thing, it's really up on this technical end of the spectrum, and it doesn't speak to a lot of people out there. And it doesn't speak to a lot of people in companies. And it's why cyber has ended up, for the most part, a little bit of a silo, a little world in of itself, rather than being embedded deeply in lots of other areas. But it's also how you tell the story. So again, there are a lot of different techniques out there for how to tell stories. So there's the narrative, and then there's the voice that you use for actually telling. This is one. This is so the Institute for whatever it is, something futures, technology futures, maybe. I think that's what it is. It's a San Francisco based organization. So if you follow the URL, the URL is actually quite good, because they've got these four, they colored them, I think, mostly for shorthand, blue, red, green, purple. But there are actually four different ways that we actually tell stories. So blue, if you like, is the way that you've all been trained to talk about what it is you do. It's the typical academic presentation. It's structured, it's focused, there's a coherent argument, it tries to be objective, it's rational, it's what you're trained to do in school, it's what you're trained to do at university, it's what a lot of companies will do. It's the default way that you will all tell stories. Red here is what you see in the movies. So again, cyber movies, it's, you know, it's Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. It's that kind of heroic, there's a lot of competition going on, there's a lot of winning and losing, and people getting killed usually in the movies. It's Avengers Assemble, you know, whatever your favorite, you know, movies that you go watch. So I bet you, a lot of you will go and watch movies, thrillers and things with that red storyline, even though when you're here, you're...
It's got a next slide, security.
Yeah, it's a legacy website, but the material is there. If you want to pick it up, go just go, it's a PDF or whatever, you go pick it up and blue kind of speaks to the mind. Red, I think, is that speaking that sense of dynamism and go. That again, so the default story types for people focused on excellence tend to be blue. The default story types for people focused on impact tend to be red, but they don't have to be. The key thing here is, even if you are focused on excellence, you can channel that kind of red style of story when you talk to people that are focused on impact. So you want to be effective in your first job, you're going into deep techie, talk red, if you like, talk in that style, and you will be far more effective at talking to bosses up your management chain focused on impact. Green in this typology or whatever archetype is really what a lot of your generation is wrapped up with, which is about being inclusive, and you know, we're all in this together, and some of us are I don't know, you may or may not be anti-capitalist, or you know, you feel that growth shouldn't just be growth, it should be sustainable growth, inclusive growth, you know, ethical growth. I'm an ethical hacker, I'm not just a hacker, I'm a, you know, these you have this sense of purpose about it that is community oriented and quite creative, inclusive. It works incredibly well talking to the public, talking that way. It works in some companies, in some circumstances. And then there's purple, which is the sort of appeal to well, we can't tell you how it works because we have to shoot you, or the, you know, in that kind of military defense sense, or you won't get, you know, quantum. It's like, well, it's, you know, spooky stuff, you know, it's like, you're not going to get your head around it, or, you know, the only way you can understand it is by looking at the mathematics. And that's, you know, anything along those lines that creates that sense of mystery, hidden truth. Cyber depends quite a lot on, or maybe it doesn't depend. It retreats to purple style stories when it doesn't know what else to do. So, you know, what you're likely to do, you can tell a very rational, sane story, what your PhD was worked on, you know, in that kind of blue voice. Potentially you try and give it a bit of a red tinge to it. So, you know, showing a bit more passion and a bit more, you know, can do, and we can make some real stuff happen with it if we invest in this idea. And if you're getting nowhere, people retreat into the purple. It's the secret sauce. Companies do it a lot around cyber. They take you into big, shiny operation centers, or they take you, they have the, you know, well, here's our hackers, then they're doing stuff that you have no idea what it is and how it works, but it seems to be doing something. And it's that seem to be doing something that is what purple stories feel to. So it is worth thinking through, depending on what you work on, what kind of voice, what kind of story you need. So it's not that the content changes, it's the way that you tell it changes here, and that's what matters. So worth thinking through for what you do and what it is that you want to persuade other people of, in what voice to use. And once you get good at that for one piece of what it is that you do, you need to start thinking about how you build narratives. And this is probably something that none of you have to do yet, but in your next job where you're part of a team, you're making something happen, you've got to tell a, you know, a much bigger story about how the world fits together. And the hard thing here is that unless you practice talking in these different voices, it will be almost impossible for you to actually handle the transitions between these different voices as it happens. So, you know, you go and watch these plays where the one actor plays, you know, 30 different, you know, roles in the play, and they manage to switch between them, and they convince you that you know, each of their personas convinces you in the play. I mean, that's the talent ultimately you're looking for. Most of us never pick it up at that. Well, we're not going to pick it up at that level, but even shifting between red and blue for people is actually quite challenging and difficult. And so it's why, if you're in teams, it's important to work out who's going to tell which bit of the story. If you look at successful pitches from small companies, startups trying to get off the ground, the ones that come across incredibly well are the ones where someone does the kind of blue, rational, you know, you can treat us seriously because we know what we're talking about piece of the story. Another person is doing that business market. We understand the market. We're going to go drive. You can trust us to make it happen. And maybe, you know, if this is a non-net zero kind of thing, there's a green piece of the story as well about why this is really good for the planet that we behave and do it this way as well. Or there might be appeal to purple. We've got some secret sauce here that you want to create that sense of mystique around. The typical narratives in cyber are this, you know, you can start with the mystique. It's like, wow, isn't that clear? And then you unpack it and you make people feel really good because you go to the blue and you give them a sense that they could almost believe or understand what it is that's going on. So you start with alchemy, if you like, and you turn it into chemistry. You turn it into, oh, we can explain this to you. We can explain how it really works. And people actually, at that point, are kind of hooked because they think these people know what they're talking about. They take this difficult fake news idea, but they can give me something that I can hang on to and turn it into reality. And then turn it into that, and this is what we're going to do to help. So I'll give you an example that David worked on. So modeling kind of stuff. Well, no, I mean, the stuff we did at HP with one of the large New York banks. I mean, the idea that you can actually model Well, the idea that you could make sense of different kinds of investment in cyber was something nobody believed was possible. That, you know, I can put my money over here, I can put my money here, I can put my, well, I probably got to put it everywhere, but I really have no sense of what my return on investment is for putting it in antivirus versus putting it on some, you know, two-factor authentication, or put it here or putting it here. So you hook people with the fact that this is a challenge for them and they don't know how to do it, and so they feel like they're wasting money. But there's a kind of mystique and the kind of like, you know, ooh. And then you turn it into a piece around systems modeling, whatever, and they kind of suddenly gain confidence. And then you roll it into, and this is how we can do it for you, kind of have an impact kind of story. So it is worth, is that what you did, Tristan? I mean, I don't know, when you were doing modeling stuff, did you do any of that? No. So
In terms of what?
in terms of shifting the narrative from different parts of the,
I mean, the things. Well, I guess some recent work with each actually with Adrian we had strengths were and making decisions around that and how to understand what investment, what the policy and strategy and stuff. That's not so deployed.
so I would say that, I don't know that example, but
Yeah.
I mean, but I would, my guess is that within HP, Adrian, whatever, they would have been filling out the rest of this story.
Yeah.
So you would be the blue piece of this story. You'd be doing the universe. We've got the technology. We can explain it. We show how it works. We can deliver this. They would have been wrapping that around that. They'd have been wrapping certainly the red piece of what does that mean for what we do as a business around ransomware. So it doesn't have to be you do the whole thing. If you've got partners doing pieces of it, that's great. It is hard. It is, as I say, hard for one person to do it all, but it is worth, again, thinking it through in terms of how to do it. So these are all, you know, little practices that if you actually put your mind to them, you will find that they're effective. The other thing is, even if you accept, you kind of understand how the people around you are thinking in terms of excellence and impact. You've got a sense of where in this future kind of sense of how much of a transformation they're looking for, they're actually operating, how ambitious they are in terms of that. And you know kind of how to tell the story, or what voice you need to use in telling the story for where you want to fit into all of that. The other thing is, even if you tell the story, you may not get noticed. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of competition. So it is about, you do need these little tricks that you know, pieces of showmanship that you throw into the mix. And the honest answer is, you know, you wouldn't dream of running a marathon if you didn't practice running, you know, every day or whatever, or regular running distances. You wouldn't go from not running for 3 years to running a marathon in one go. I mean, you'd probably, I don't know whether you'd die, but you wouldn't do very well out of it. And yet, intellectually, we do this all the time. You know, so in companies, you know, people have very run-of-the-mill jobs, and then they all get collected together to do some brainstorming around where the company should go and be creative. But of course, if you haven't been creative for months on end, you're not going to be that creative. And if you're surrounded with another group of people, none of who've been creative for months on end, and you're all going to try and brainstorm, normally what happens is rubbish, isn't it? You don't have a great output. So the best answer to that is practice being creative every day. It doesn't even have to be creative in what you do. It doesn't matter whether you do flower arranging or you cook or whatever it happens to be. I mean, if you're creative in something, it will help that part of your brain be creative. But actually, even better, if you can be creative around the work that you do all the time. And it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. When you're on the tube, wherever you are, just have that one moment where there's one thing you're doing and you just think, what could I do differently? Start with what would surprise people. And a lot of the time, you're going to throw them away. They're not going to be great. I mean, the thing with ideas like this is you need to, you know, have 10 of them to find one that's even half reasonable and throw the rest away. But if you get into the practice of just getting your head on 5 minutes on the tube of, I'm going to think of 3 ideas before the next stop, you will actually get good at it. And then you start collecting these things up for using them when it really matters. And that having a little insight, a little trick way of looking at the world, something that people suddenly notice and go, oh, I wasn't thinking of it that way, makes all the difference. So it's how you carry the story forward. So I haven't actually told you very much. I've told you understand who you're talking to, where you and they are focused, how to talk to them, and how to capture their imaginations. But we can go, I mean, if you have questions, we can go back and look at more cyber examples of where this works. So what I'm trying to tell you is actually it's all quite simple, but nobody ever tells you to do this stuff. And if you start practicing it, you will go all the way, whether you want to end up professors or whether you want to end up senior roles in companies or government, you will go all the way because most people have no idea how to navigate any of it. And that's my 2 pennies worth on shaping cyber policy.
Distillation of a lot of experience. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I say these things not because, well, they are all in, as I say, Harvard Business Review articles, but because they actually work. These are ones that I've used time and time and time again, and they just take wherever you're at and they move it on a step. And I'm sure the experienced people here will say, quite often it's hard. Wherever you are, you can feel stuck. It's not working. The team's not working. Research isn't getting traction. People aren't funding me. It's like, you could use these in writing research grants. It's finding that extra, isn't it? It's finding that extra angle or whatever that suddenly people wake up and they go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, we should do that. But you can use it for managing every single situation that you're going to, or the vast majority of situations you're going to meet in your careers. Yeah.
Going back to the voices slide. So I'm interpreting how this is meant to play out. But when I sort of look at the archetypes of like those typologies,